everyone. Happy Friday night. Today is February 4th, 2022. We are back at it for another episode of Across the Pitch. I am your co-host, Mike Barrera. Of course, as always, my co-host, Dave Miller. Dave, how you doing tonight on this Friday evening?
Well, I'm good. Yourself?
Good, man. It's Friday. It's been a long week.
Oh, yeah.
Just kind of settled down. We had a preseason game yesterday, so that's kind of good to kind of get the vibes going before the
Yeah.
soccer season officially kicks off in a matter of 20 some days. But we have a lot to talk tonight. Before we bring
Absolutely.
on our guest Jose, I want to do the sponsors, just get them out of the way real quick, and just get into the nitty gritty here. So, of course, as always, our first sponsor is Manscaped. Get 20% off Manscaped with 20% off with the shipping code AATBirds at manscaped.com. We have OddsJam, the number one software platform for sportsbook bandits. You can use an arbitrage calculator and more. OddsJam.com. Check out Statement Games, the newest and most fun way for fantasy sports entertainment. Again, you can win gift cards and prizes. It's free to sign up at statementgames.com. Lots of watches are on the this list. A brand new assortment of watches that you can check out at AAT Birds with the promo code for 10% off at checkout. And then lastly, our shop with the AAT Sports Network. You can get our gear, shirts, cups, mugs, hoodies, all that fun stuff. So again, that's our sponsors. Wrap that up real quick. I'm going to bring on our good buddy Jose Nunez on to talk some of his thoughts on the preseason and the Union. Jose, man, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, guys. I'm excited. I always appreciate the opportunity to come in and jam myself into conversations. And quite frankly, how fortunate we are, right, to have our Philadelphia Union back in a midweek scrimmage where, frankly, it was all about fitness, but ultimately it's so nice to see the boys in blue back.
Yeah.
Yep. Well said. I mean, it feels weird to kind of talk about soccer again. Considering the season just ended, what feels like yesterday, just about a month and a half ago now. Dave, how are your thoughts? We've had the game now. What is your overall thoughts after their performance?
I mean, obviously, it's always nice to see that. I mean, you come out of a preseason game unscathed. I know Sergio had to come off before half time, but Jim just sort of said like he was cramped. There was no point, chucking him back out there for another 2 minutes. We'll take him off now. He's played 40 minutes. So again, it's always good again, as Jose said, to get out there, get some good fitness. But I think again, another big pro is and again, this is where players like Jack McGlynn and Quinn Sullivan sort of got their whet their appetite for first team football last year. Playing 15-year-olds in preseason friendlies. I mean, it's always good to see young academy homegrown players coming through. And again, that's always a positive. Like in a pro preseason, you allow these younger players to become more familiar, which was obviously great to see.
Yep, exactly. I mean, it like you said, it just a lot of promise now after those first 90 minutes are in the book. Jose, you were able to watch the game from start to finish, so that's one big reason why we had you on. Dave and I are both tied up with work, so you are the expert of the preseason game so far. What are your thoughts? Anything in particular that stood out for you? Anything that maybe was a disappointment for you in that first match?
For the record, I do have a full-time job, so I do actually work. I must admit, I was watching it kind of on the side as I was completing some data work that I needed to get done. So certainly listening, and what was really exciting was just seeing that high press early on with Santos and Carranza really linking up in what could be, I think, a really dynamic duo of the Philadelphia Union this year, and plug and play some other names with obviously someone who we're really excited to see, though probably went back to Denmark to get his visa started and done, with Michael Ua. Or maybe a Corey Burke, though he's more of a tree waiting to just have something hit his head. But ultimately, some really exciting stuff to watch. As I'm looking at my notes about the game, again, the importance of this game was just very, very low, and frankly little. I think it was all about fitness. Obviously, we were missing a lot of players with Klesnes. Jamiro still not back quite yet, or probably still working on some stuff with his family, I'm sure, and getting him into the country. And Bizo on his way back now, having been defeated over Thursday, I think, or was it that same Friday? I can't remember.
Yeah,
I think it was yesterday.
Thursday.
Yep.
So long way to say we were missing some key players, though it was still a really strong side. And I think as we'll talk later on the show, it's just how deep this team suddenly feels, right? After we see the legs of McGlynn and baby Aronson or Aronson 2.0, hopefully, just really fill in and just give us some depth that we weren't expecting. To think that Martinez, I frankly didn't even miss him because everybody else was doing well with Bueno and McGlynn. And sure, when Martinez came in, he was a little rusty and maybe still working in his head like he was with the national team and not quite getting his passes in or back to that style of play. It was still really good to see some of those faces. I think if you're thinking about winners and losers of this match, I for my notes, certainly getting Carranza up and running is incredible, right? What a great thing to do at a minute 52. I think the goal was really early on. If you weren't paying attention or you went to get a glass of water, you probably missed it, which is a bummer. But getting him going is going to be incredibly important. And again, I think, as I'm sure with Dave, we'll talk about the most recent news and coming into the league potentially, or as Tom Bogert said on Twitter, more than likely now with the Chicago Fire doing some more spending, just how savvy we are as the Philadelphia Union with our purchases and our GM just being probably the most savvy worker of a budget and getting a $6 million player for nickels and dimes, honestly. So to see Carranza going was great. I thought Stu Finley played very, very well as a center back as well. I certainly miss our other running tree that is Elliott, but ultimately he was, I think, just off on the sideline doing some fitness. Shout out to Morgan. I can't remember her or pronounce her last name correctly. Tranxa. I think she had some wonderful pictures of the training sessions and certainly the social team over at the Union, seeing him getting some running. Again, Bueno, incredible first half that he had, a little rusty, but ultimately I think he is really starting to cement himself as a potential player for the Union, especially with probably what he wasn't expecting and playing a huge role at the tail end of the season against the New York City FC team, obviously due to the COVID outbreak or whatever that was at the end of the season. But when you think about losers, and I think Dave talked about it briefly, how rusty Sullivan looked. Every single time he touched that ball, it felt like Bedoya touched it and that everything slowed down. And he's supposed to be a fast, slick, thinking guy. And ultimately, every time he touched it, it was a negative pass. And it wasn't even like a negative pass to retain possession, but just something out of desperation. So it felt really odd to watch that from him. But ultimately, just I think, again, it was all about fitness, especially against what many are dubbing a Philadelphia Union 2, and how weird it was to see Ray Gaddis and Pat Noonan on the other side of the sideline. Just really bizarre scenes out in Florida. But those are really my thoughts. I know not super in depth, but ultimately I think maybe we'll get a better look or a better idea of what's going to happen this season, this coming Tuesday, I think, against Montreal. Hopefully a live stream again. But for now, I think a lot of excitement, and I think we'll talk about it a little bit further into the show. So back to you.
Yeah, I mean, just to note there, I also mentioned Eric's comment that he put up while you were discussing the preseason game. The Cincinnati, of course, has poached a few of our past players and coaches. So it was, Cincinnati gets a good look on what their future will look like in about 10 years. But speaking of our past, it was weird seeing Ray Gaddis out there in a different uniform, running around doing his thing. So it's great to see him back on the field, but it's certainly going to be weird adjusting to him being in a different uniform. But I know from listening to Coach Curtin over the offseason, there was a lot of high praise on Quinn Sullivan so far. So hearing that he may have had a bit of an, iffy performance, isn't concerning yet. It's only preseason. But of course, you want to see him kind of get going because as Dave and I had alluded to during last week's show, this depth chart is getting deeper and deeper. It feels like almost every single week. Like there's more players that you think can contribute to this team, and where does Quinn Sullivan fit in? Dave, just I guess this question for you then, based off that, if this team enters the regular season and Quinn Sullivan is kind of rusty, do you think that he gets further down the pecking order for substitutions?
I mean, I think, admittedly, I think he probably is at the bottom of the sort of four attacking sort of midfield options already. I think
Mhm.
Gastag's ahead of him, Montera's ahead of him, and Paxton's ahead of him already. So he's already where fourth in the fourth sort of place anyway. So I think for
Mhm.
him, again, maybe he knows that and he's trying to do, maybe perhaps he's just trying to do too much to perhaps show or impress Jim. I'm not really sure, but I think, again, obviously, as Jose said, clearly it's the first preseason game. You can't really
Yeah.
take too much stock in it. Maybe it's just a bit of bit of rust he needs to get over. Who knows? Maybe he might play on Tuesday against Montreal, or during the week against Montreal. He might look really, really good.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, sort of the other flip is could he push for a starting place? So I think at the moment, for him, it's just getting in the minutes. Because again, I think, what is he, 17, 18 still? He's still a kid. So, I mean, I don't think there's too much to really panic about at this moment in time anyway. But I mean, who knows? I mean, with this, how strong this team is, maybe one of him and Paxton goes out on loan to another team or something for the 2022 season. We don't really know at this stage.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, again, I wouldn't worry too much just yet.
I guess in a way, kind of segueing off Eric's comment, we are as deep as possible. If we're worried about who is going to be the 15th, 16th, 17th guy on the bench roster, that's a good thing. That's a good problem to have, and it certainly helps talking about that rather than, oh my God, how are we going to formulate a starting 11? How are we going to put together a good roster? But
Yeah.
in terms of the offseason and the depth and what Jose has alluded to already with what he's seen on the field, Dave, you had a pretty great article that came out today regarding the offseason from the Union, what they've done so far in the past few weeks since the season has closed. Can you share a little bit your thoughts on that article that you wrote today and what the fans can expect by reading it?
I mean, I think obviously I started off, which is funny enough, alluding to Eric's comment, was just how strong the depth of the team was. I think
Mhm.
obviously obviously with the NYCFC game last year in the Eastern Conference final, it did show just how strong the depth of the team was. The fact that they were able to plug and fill gaps in the team where with players that weren't playing regularly and consistently, and then you had even Orion Colin who hadn't played in feels like a decade. He
Yeah.
came in and was very solid, was very, very good, played very, very well. Got Nathan Harrell in there who has come in at points in the season and contributed. And then again, Bueno as well. I think players like Bueno, who have barely played since they joined the Union, they came in and obviously played their role as well. So I think obviously starting off the article was saying how strong in depth the team is, and then sort of dove into sort of the retained list and what sort of moves they made. Again, like players like Cole Turner, who we didn't see much of at all last year. So again,
Yeah.
it's good for them to either send him out on loan and have a scout go watch him weekly, or have him just around the first team again and see where he is. Get a good look at another academy player. And then obviously keeping Jack Elliott, who, as Jose alluded to, is just another sort of like a brick wall, a big tree, just who's on that pitch, not just just breaking up opposition attacks, but causing havoc going forward as well. With as I know, as Mike you've alluded to a lot, with his positive play going forward. So I mean,
Yep.
again, that's sort of like the start of it, and then we'll obviously dive deeper into things. Obviously, Cash believing, and Julian Carranza and Mikel Ure. And again, I think it's also very understated. I think people won't look at it as much, perhaps, but just how big of a win it was for this team to keep a hold of players like Kai Wagner and
Yes.
Jose Martinez,
Yes.
and just how big of an impact that will have on the season. I think last year, a lot of people were worried when Mark McKenzie left and Brendan Aronson left, because they were two vital players. And people.
I was worried. I mean, I'm going to interrupt. I was so worried when McKenzie and Aronson left, and I'm thinking to myself, how the hell are we going to do this?
Yeah.
How are we going to compete?
Yeah. And that's what I mean. And then again, obviously, you have that historic season. You lose arguably your two most important players, two best players. And again, people were concerned. People were worried about how we're going to actually be able to move on. And now this year, it's the opposite sort of way. They've kept hold of Kyle Wagner, they've kept hold of Jose Martinez, and just how they can continue to build the foundations of what they've got, and hopefully, take that next step forward, win the MLS Cup, or even just get to the final. Something, you know what I mean? So I think, again, it just sort of outlaid the work they've done in preseason, in the off season, what I thought of it essentially.
For the record, the game before the NYCFC game that Aurelian Collin appeared at before that one was in October of that very same year. So, just popped in as a sub. So it's hard to believe. And, I actually had posed a question to Tannenwald, the incredible writer for the Inquirer. I recommend that if you're going to subscribe to any one newspaper in Philadelphia for soccer news, he alone makes the subscription worth it. So shout out to him and his work. But that Mr. Collin needs to come back, whether as an ambassador, as a coach, or something. He is now cemented himself as folklore in Philadelphia after that performance against NYCFC. But, Dave, you bring up some incredible points in that I think Jim probably looked at Tanner in the eyes and said, if you want me to stay here longer, you need to give me a roster that works. I need to keep Martinez. I need to keep Kai, because I'm sure there was enough money in some of these offers to offload those two, to have a Mark McKenzie type of situation, to have an Aronson type of situation where you're taking that money and investing back into the system. But I think with all the attention that Jim was getting from Cincinnati and Mr. Albright knocking at the door saying, hey, I got a boatload of money for you to buy players, though Cincinnati's been buying a lot of ex-Philadelphia players. I'm not sure if the money's being actually spent quite yet. I think push came to shove, and ultimately Ernst Tanner just had to make the call and say, you know what? We got to keep him. We got to keep Jim. He's, I think, the longest tenured coach or second longest tenured coach right now in the MLS. I could be completely wrong in that, but it feels like it's second, one of the longest. Got to finally give him a roster that I think, as we'll continue through the show, makes him a front runner, makes his team and his city a front runner to be favorites for the MLS Cup. As I look at my notes here, I couldn't agree with you more, Dave, in that we are so competitive in every single position. And one thing to remember is we don't have Champions League this year. We're not competing in it, but we do have the U.S. Open Cup, which can throw a wrench into anyone's season. And luckily, a lot of that travel is domestic, but ultimately, domestic travel within the U.S. can mean further travel than international travel for the Champions League. So players like the Sullivans, players like the Bergs, players like the Harriels and Finleys are going to take a huge role in making sure that that's a nice, long, successful run and ultimately finally get us that trophy that we've been pushing for, been so close at the doorstep many, many times.
I'm going to stop you, Jose. It's not trophy, it's trophies, as Eric puts, cups, multiple, not just one, multiple. Let's make that clear real quick. We want to bring cups and titles, the whole thing, get everything, a clean sweep of the season.
No, you know what? And that's what it feels like, right? And I think we can all agree that we have that type of depth that we see in Europe when you have these teams competing in multiple competitions and trying to have long, deep runs into where it's always the next man up type of mentality. So this is, again, I can't believe that our little all Philadelphia Union is feeling this optimistic going into the season. And frankly, all we did was keep players and upgrade one position, and we feel like $1 million. It's unbelievable what one swap and keeping two heads does.
Well, it's funny. So it's kind of just touch on everything you guys said and just kind of add a little bit to it. I think both of you guys made excellent points here. I really don't even need to say more than that. But I think the biggest thing you saw from last season to this season is the removal of the question marks for these younger players. You no longer have that question like, well, what kind of players Leon Flock? What kind of players Jack McGlynn or Paxton Aronson? You learned so much last season that you feel a lot more confident now with knowing your roster is the way it is right now. At the same time, in terms of your forward position, you really just had Casper last year. If you're going to be honest, Corey Burke was out in and out of the lineup. Sergio Santos was in and out of the lineup. I mean, unfortunately, the health was the biggest issue. The availability was the biggest issue. And you bring in Carranza, and that just adds one piece to that puzzle that you thought Davo was going to be last year, which obviously never panned out.
Forgot
Now,
about him.
yeah, exactly. And now on top of all of that, you also bring in you have one full season now with Daniel Gazdag in the lineup. So again, this was another question mark you had last year. What should we expect out of Daniel? That question has been kind of put to rest for the most part. So you're entering the season knowing that you are so deep, but at the same time, you have so much confidence in such a young group of players. And if you were to put in, let's say, the first Open Cup game, Paxton, who I know I see Philly Sports Talk podcast says, they're really high on Paxton Aronson, which is I completely agree. He's the sky's the limit for him. If you put him in the lineup with all these young players, Sorensen, Matt Real, and you put him in the U.S. Open Cup, they're talented enough to advance in that tournament and save the legs of the starting lineup. Yeah. Because now you have that extra depth to alleviate the strain that we saw last year with the CCL run. Because you had players like Bedoya playing every single match for every single different part of that season. While in the Open Cup, maybe he doesn't play much at all. Maybe he only plays here or there, 50 minutes, 60 minutes here or there. So you have a lot of flexibility now with this roster to conserve the starters, which we all know Coach Curtin is very reliant on that core starting lineup. And he doesn't typically stray away from it, especially from the back four. And if you can give some rest to the back four and put Stuart Finley in all the Open Cup games, for example, that just saves Elliott and Glasses in particular for when the playoffs come around. And that's the expectation, is the playoffs right now. And just mention one thing that Eric brought up. It feels like we're adding Joe Blanton to the 2008 Phillies or Jay Ajayi to the 2017 Eagles. It's those final pieces to the puzzle that just kind of make the team a little bit more complete. Even if it is just one player, even if it is just for one position, that the depth you have now is certainly a difference maker. But the Jose, alluding to that a bit, the biggest signing, of course, is Mikael Ua to the roster. What were your overall thoughts when he was signed, the news started coming out, and now that he's officially part of the Union?
See, Philadelphia Union Twitter is just such an interesting thing to watch and observe. I don't usually delve into it too much. Again, the Tan Waltz of the world, the Bogarts of the world who comment here and there, and ultimately they're probably the only ones you really need to listen to outside of us across the pitch soccer show. Make sure you follow, like, subscribe, all the things above, hit the bell, whatever the kids say on YouTube anymore. It's really interesting. There's a lot of excitement behind the man, and ultimately, he's done wonderful things in his home country for, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Bromby. That excites me. And ultimately, again, back to the comment of how savvy we are with the money for, as we'll talk about, the Douglas Costas of the world, the Insignias of the world out in Toronto, and all these other names that are coming in with Shaqiri. My God, the type of money that's being dropped on these players just doesn't make a lot of sense for the MLS. And or maybe it does. I don't know. I don't want to judge. I know that I appreciate what we're doing, and we haven't really had a reason to doubt. I call him Mr. Tanner, but Ernst Tanner. We have no reason to doubt him outside of our sexy season purchase that never panned out. That we
or Davo,
loading out and offloading. I don't think he ever touched the pitch outside of maybe a preseason match. Maybe I could be wrong. Anybody in the comments, please feel free to correct me. But I have no reason to doubt Ernst Tanner when he's brought players like Flock into the picture, when he's brought in Martinez into the picture. And my gosh, to have Kai Wagner in our team, and because of Ernst Tanner's research and Ernst Tanner's trust and obviously network, whoever the hell he wants to bring in, I'm fully behind. I can trust the man, and I almost want to say give the man a 5, 6, 10-year contract, because at this point he's making us as consistent as it can be. So super excited. I appreciate everything that Shavilko did. I think it was right. It was time for him to move on, as much as I liked seeing him around the King of Prussia area with his lovely wife and son. I think the Philadelphia Union needed to move on from a streaky striker, when in reality we need one or two options that are not necessarily consistent, but maybe interchangeable, that when one's going through a streak, the other one can kind of sit and gain his momentum again. So long way to say that I think we fix that problem. And hopefully those around him can also perform at the level that he deserves, and, back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said there. You're right. With Tanner's, current resume of players he's bringing in, besides maybe 2 or 3, he's hit on majority of the players. Whether even if they're just serviceable players, he's definitely certainly proven that he's got an eye for talent, and he can bring in somebody. I think at this point, you have to trust him. There's no other reason not to trust him. And what he's been able to do, and it brings you a lot of promise. You have such a young group of players. If you know he can surround these people with talent, I mean, the sky's the limit for how long this team can stay as a contender. And I want to pull up Eric's comment here on the page here. That's a far better thought on Casper than the Union Facebook and Twitter. Also, Tan for Light, which is true. There's a lot of people who were kind of down on Casper. Dave and I talked about this last week.
Yeah.
Whether you didn't like him or you did like him, he was still a very important part of this franchise, and he was still crucial in the CCL run. And he was crucial at times in that playoff push last year, because let's not forget, we were in 9th place at one point, or just outside the playoff picture at the end of the CCL run, and then we came right storming back into it. But in terms of the lineups, the potential lineups we have in place, Dave and I had talked about this
I was
briefly.
going to say,
Yep, go ahead.
Go back into that, the whole Casper Noir thing. Sorry.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Garnoa, I think it was probably the one, obviously, as I said, it was one that is the typical Ernest Tanner sort of savvy move. But again, this is where the Union differ to these other teams. Again, the Chicago Fire, LA Galaxy, NYC FC, where these guys come out and they spend tens of millions of pounds and dollars on top South American players, or they go into Europe and find these 30-plus-year-old former very strong players. The Union is sort of on the other sort of flip side of things. They go off, they look at them, they look at the top divisions of sort of the lesser leagues or the lesser countries in Europe. Denmark, your Norways, your Hungary's obviously with Gazdag and UA. And again, it sort of shows just how great the scouting network is. But again, it definitely shows the big contrast in the way in which the Union work, which again is it's an interesting way in which they work. Again, hopefully as well, hopefully I'm going to preach patience for UA as well. I think a lot of fans are going to be expecting him to hit the ground running. He's got to score 10 goals in his first 10 games, otherwise he's a flop. No, Gazdag took time to adjust to the league. The MLS is a different league to Europe. Players are going to take time to adjust. We saw it with Gazdag about 3 months in last year. It was, do the Union need to move on from Gazdag already? He's coming mid-season off the back of the Euros where he got injured and he's had a slow start. Okay, so be it. Let the guy take his time. And as we saw the season go on, he just got better and better. And I think now, obviously, it was difficult at times last year when he had players like, when it was Shabirka on his own up front, because, again, this isn't a slight to Casper, but he is sort of a one-way striker. He has the ball at his feet and you give the ball to him in the box. That's what you do with Casper. Now you've got Carranza and Noir, who are both probably a bit more pacey. There's so much more he can do with the ball behind them in terms of feeding the ball to them and working alongside them. So again, hopefully that'll open up Gazdag's game more. And then obviously looking at Casper, obviously, I think, as we said, he's a very divisive figure. A lot of Union fans didn't like him, but I think the way, I think that's probably an understatement, but the way that fans perhaps don't look at it is that Casper was the forward at the time that brought the Union from this 4th, 5th, 6th seed to contenders. He was that goal scorer, that 10-plus goal season goal scorer that took the Union from this, they might win a playoff game if they do good for them to support Shield winners, CONCACAF Champions League semi-finalists. And I think that doesn't get played, and that sort of isn't looked at enough for just how important he was. I personally would have kept him this year. I don't think them moving on from him was perhaps, this big need. I thought perhaps they could have kept him alongside Uwar and Carranza. And, perhaps if he is that second striker alongside Uwar and, Carranza comes in for Casper sort of, they sort of rotate with one another maybe. I think that might have worked because, again, I think Casper still could contribute. He was the sort of striker that you give him a chance, he'll take it. He might be anonymous for 89 minutes, but he'll pop up at one moment in the game and he'll score. We saw it so often last year, and we've seen it so often throughout his Union career, and I think it's going to be interesting to see what it's like to actually have a player like Shaqiri in that team where they're going to constantly be creating opportunities for him inside the box. And I think that was the biggest detriment to the Union last year, was the fact that they were so hesitant to create things. They were so hesitant to try different things. They get the ball in positive positions, and they'll be like, "Oh, I don't want to make the mistake here." So if we pass the ball around in a circle for 3 minutes and lose the ball, we haven't taken a risk. And I think that when having a player like Shaqiri there, who, I mean, be realistic, he's going to come into this league and he's going to think he's the dog's bollocks, and he's going to think he's the guy. So of course he's going to, it might be a detriment to Shaqiri, but he's going to come and he's going to try and create stuff. He's going to try and show that he's this big star. So I think, again, that might work in Kasper's advantage, where he's actually going to have a guy that's constantly going to be feeding him the ball in the box if he does play week in, week out. So I think, again, it could end up being, that could be a very positive move for Kasper. And I think, personally, I'm going to miss him. I think he should be in the Ring of Honor at some point, whether it's after he's retired or, because I don't think it can be stated enough just how important he was for this franchise in terms of going from essentially pretenders to contenders to potential champions. I think he was that needle mover.
For the FIFA Ultimate Team junkies, I'm not one of them, but I know there's many of them that maybe listen to. We talk about what Ua can really do and how he differs from Shavilko. He can really stretch that field. Looking at some statistics from FIFA, and again, not that it's the marker, he's a tad slower than Santos, and we know how fast Sergio is. He is probably one of the fastest players I think I've ever watched with and without the ball. That to hear that's there with maybe better finishing and actually ultimately better finishing than him, that excites the hell out of me. So again, I think Shavilko was the right stepping stone. I think Dave phrased it perfectly. It was just time to move on, and I think we appreciate everything he did. It was just next step, Finishing third, fourth, fifth is not what we want to do, and he moved this a little bit further onto where we want to be, and hopefully Ua gets us to that trophy that we so much desire.
I think as well.
Go ahead, Dave. Go ahead.
I think as well, what's also exciting to see is we're going to have what's it called? Two strikers who obviously I think Jim said yesterday that Carranza pressed high up the pitch and he looked very positive and he actually looked like he had pace. I think again it's going to be exciting. I don't think people realise how important or how big it's going to be for the Union in terms of their style of play, how they utilise their high press this season. Having two players at Uar and Carranza, hopefully that is the sort of the strike partnership where how that can help with the high press. It can allow the team to push further up the pitch itself, having two quicker strikers, and it also help players like Jamiro Montero and Gazdag, having quicker players, to get in behind, stretch, as Jose said, stretch the defenders, and then we can play more balls in behind. You can be more creative in what you do. I think that could really help the Union going forward. But again, as I consistently say, they lack a plan B. This team really lacks a plan B in terms of, can they switch to another formation? Can they bring on the player to try and change the game if it's not with formations not working, if they're losing? I still think they need a pacey, quick, skillful winger who, the team's losing 1-0 with 20 minutes to go, change the shape, chuck him on, try and stretch the game a bit more. I think that's the one thing this team really lacks. And we saw it at points last year. And it would, when being a goal down, you're having to, face a big defensive block, having to watch Ali Bedoya and Leon Flack on the wings trying to, get down the sideline and putting it across. It's sort of like, it's seen over and over again. It's like the definition of insanity, having a quick, pacey player. I think as Mike alluded to, I think it might have been last week or the week before, having a Fafa Pico out there, just a player that is quick, just quick, can stretch the game, run at defenders, put on their toes. I think again that they need something like that can change things.
I'm willing to bet a beer, probably a few beers and a few pizzas, that we will see a formation where our wingers will be Santos on the left, Carranza on the right, and Ua up top to really have some pace and have some skill. So then we drop, and I think again, Ring of Honor. Sure, we talk about you mentioned Kasper. I question that, and that's okay. That's different minds can defer, and that's fine. But I think this is the season where Bedoya starts to maybe exit in a way and cede some of that time to the future of the Philadelphia Union. And I think that's acceptable, and I think and I hope that in his mind he's okay with that too, because that right side is as slow as it can get when he's on the ball. So
Yes.
sure, what he brings in that of leadership and heart can never be replaced, and I think will be very hard to replace. But ultimately, what he's lacking in speed is just ultimately killing us. And I appreciate the Bedoya lovers. I too appreciate him. I just don't know that he is the right person for this team as we continue to move forward onto the future and ultimately getting the multiple trophies and cups every single year.
Yes, I think that's a great point. So you've mentioned Jonathan Tannenwald a few times. I mean, Dave and I have been able to work with him a little bit in the media, and he is as nice as he is in person as he's on Twitter. So he's definitely a great source for everything Union. But one thing that he mentioned on Twitter, I think a few weeks ago, I think somebody asked him, and this is something that Dave and I had alluded to, I think last week or just maybe in private conversation, was Ali Bedoya is going to start the year. It's just simple as that. He's going to be in the starting rotation to start the year. The question is, how long is he going to be a starting player? Or how long is it going to be when Jim says, I have to take him out after 60 minutes or, whatever it might be? Because the problem is last year, we didn't see that. We had him playing 90 minutes into extra time, whatever it might be. Even if you played 3 games that week, he would still be out there. There was a time, I can't remember what it was. There was one game in the season where we thought, this is the game that Ali does not get any playing time. He finally gets some rest. And sure enough, Ali Bedoya played for like half the game. I think it was the
Orlando?
It was either Orlando or the Revolution right before we went to one of the CCL games. Where we're like, okay, he's going to get that break.
It was the Revolution because I remember
the
Revolution were flying high, and I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be the B team, and it was B team versus B team because they were having their own injuries with Gill and some other players being out.
Yes.
So I remember that match very clearly.
Yes, okay. So the Orlando game was the one where it's sort of like everyone was at breaking point, was it? When Ali was terrible.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was sort of the breaking point game.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think to Jose's point, it's just a matter of when does he finally kind of let him get that rest he deserves and let the younger players get the playing time they deserve. Because we saw it plenty of times last year. We thought, God, if you just put Quinn in here, if you just put McGlynn in here, what a world of difference we can have if Bedoya just doesn't play the 90 minutes. Again, credit to him. I love Ali. He's a great person. He's always really nice in the interviews. He just seems like a great captain overall. But age, what's it called? The father time is undefeated kind of thing. Eventually, it always catches up to all of us. So I certainly want to see him take a little bit of a back seat. But to Jose's point and to Dave's point here, in terms of the lineup, last year, very, very briefly, I think it only happened one time, we did see Jim Curtin go with Santos, Burke, and Casper all in one shot. I think it might have only happened 1 or 2 games at the most. And of course, these guys are going in and out.
You're describing desperation.
Exactly. So when you think about it, and again, Jim is very set in his ways with certain things. Going to the Christmas tree was something that was a bit shocking for a lot of us. We're like, oh, wow, he's finally kind of adjusting. I think, to Jose's point, I think what he had last year with Corey, Casper, and Sergio wasn't the right fit for having all 3 of them on the pitch, with Casper essentially playing the 10. I think now with the current lineup you have, if you did play Ua, Carranza, and Santos, that would be a far better trio than what we saw last year. So I don't rule out some sort of weird formation if we're in a pinch, if we're down a goal, whatever it might be. And as Eric says, I can guarantee Bedoya is on his way out. I'm waiting for the thing to pop up on my screen. I bought his jersey. That pretty much seals the deal. So, Eric, seal the deal. See you later, Bedoya. So don't buy any UA jerseys, Eric, please, for the love of God. Not at least until 10 years down the road. But so, again, I think the formation could change. Also, one thing in particular that we discussed last week was what happened to Leon Flock. So the lineup that we talked about, Jose, last week was the usual back 4. Then you have the diamond of Jamiro, Daniel, Ali, and Martinez. And then, of course, Mikael and Carranza or Santos up top. So where does Leon Flock go? We've heard left back. We've heard replacement for Martinez. We've heard Martinez moving up the pitch. How about Bueno? Where does he fall in the picture? How about Sorensen? How about Matt Real? If you go with that starting lineup of the 11 players I mentioned, who is your top 3 bench guys off the bench? I mean, with how much of a cluster is and how much you don't want to take Leon off the pitch. He's such a big playmaker on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, it's tough. And, I actually even, and maybe I'm being ballsy in saying this, but I don't even know if Montero is a guaranteed starter, to be honest with you. I think his place in that lineup is very questionable considering the talent that's there already and ultimately the balance that Flock brings onto that team defensively. I think we saw flashes of Martinez as an offensive player, not a shooter, but taking on players out on the right wing. Can't remember the game specifically, but he had that incredible run on the sideline from the right side that he beat 1 or 2 players and then put the ball across. And I think Casper finished it.
It was the Orlando game at home. Yep.
Yeah. That was the one.
He's the only player that can do that in this team, it feels like. That's one concern.
Yeah, because I think he's the only one who's got to actually
cojones.
Yeah, to want to take some of these players on. So it's I think it's our second highest paid player is potentially a bench player. That's a question that I think Ernst Tanner needs to answer, and that of Jamiro. I don't know that he's a starter, but that again illustrates how fortunate we are to have the lineup that we have, where I think you look at other teams across this league and you think, wow, that is dreadful. But that frankly was the Union 6-7 years ago when Danny Mwanga was our best player, or God, we were so desperate. We were bringing in Freddie Adu to be a splash and jersey sale. So it'll be really interesting, but I'm really high certainly on McGlynn. My God, being at those playoff games and throughout the season with my season tickets when I could make it, the kid can ball. He is foregoing college to be at the level that he is for a reason, and he shows it. So I would say McGlynn, probably one of the top. Certainly Bueno, who also I think has shown flashes when he's finally given the opportunity to flash. I think that's one of my biggest concerns this season. I really hope Jim starts using subs. It's not like they cost money. So I would say Bueno. And then I'm interested to see, because I think this is the make or break season for Burke. I don't know that he comes back unless he has some sort of stellar season. There's no reason to keep him otherwise, another roster spot. And unless he is considered an up and down Philadelphia Union 2 and Philadelphia Union player, which I don't think he wants to be.
No, not at
so
this
I'm
point.
and I'm intrigued to see, because the man is gigantic. I walked next to him going into the stadium after, practices that he wasn't able to participate in. It's just, he's an international player that needs to play. And sure, it's Jamaica, but ultimately I feel like he needs to really show up this season. Otherwise, he may be looking somewhere else, much like Fontana or other players that I think we've shifted around the league in that of Fafa and whatnot.
Yeah, it's funny because, Corey does just offers. I mean, as tall and skinny as he is from afar, he's also extremely strong, and he can really muscle his way into the defense and kind of push his way. We saw it plenty of times this season. So, we were talking about it as well last week. It's like, what happens to Corey Burke? Somebody that we were so excited to see come off the bench, kind of bring that extra bit of grit and strength, and he plays his heart out every single time. So, I mean, he's just a great bench asset to have. But if you are going to have Carranza and Ua there, and Sergio, after seeing his year last year when healthy, is arguably one of the best sparks we have off the bench. Where does Corey fit in that? And then plus, again, everybody else underneath of him that could rotate the lineup and kind of take his playing time. But actually, Jose, you reminded me of something that I forgot to ask you about the preseason game. So there was a small bit of hype over Darbo, the young U2 player who was out there. Any thoughts on him? I know people were kind of excited to see what he had. I know he's like the future, basically, a couple years down the road for us.
Yeah, unbelievably fast, in my opinion. You think of Asante as being really fast. This young guy is incredibly fast himself. Touches were good. I must admit, I was back and forth between a Zoom call and some data work I was doing. So what I caught, I appreciated. Don't know that as you alluded to, I don't know that he's part of this roster just yet.
No. Yeah.
He very much will be a practice player that just goes down and gets minutes with the Philadelphia Union too. And God, I wish they would just call him Bethlehem Steel again to make it easier on all of us.
Yeah, no, I know. They actually had their first preseason game last night. I believe they had a good turnout for their preseason game. No, so Darbo, I think he's only about 16 years old, if I remember correctly. He's a pretty young kid, but I've heard, like I said, the speed. He seems to be playing above his age group for sure. We saw some nice highlights from him last year. So I think if you're looking 2023-24 Philadelphia Union roster, his name has to come into that conversation down the road. But again, if there are injuries, if the Open Cup has availability, maybe we see him on the bench for something. So it's someone to kind of keep an eye on moving forward. But in terms of the schedule, so I know the schedule opens up on February 26th. Jose, are you going to be at the game that day?
I am. I must admit my appearances to the stadium will probably start to slow down come July. We're expecting our second child, so I think my hands will be pretty busy. Thank you. My hands will be pretty full July and August, but certainly as we turn into September and October and hopefully further into the season, I hope to be there. But yeah, I'll be there. I actually have a group of 12 of us going for the 26th. So we're going to have a nice get together. Section 140 will be up and jumping and singing and probably cursing.
Yeah, so I will be there as well. I should be getting my media pass for that. I know Dave will be on watching the game as well from afar. We start off with Minnesota, and then we go to Montreal and San Jose, and then after that we go to NYCFC for a little rematch there, and back home for Charlotte and Columbus. So we won't go into the whole schedule. We could be doing this all night, but just for those first 6 games, we have Minnesota, Montreal, San Jose, NYCFC, Charlotte, and Columbus. What game intrigues you the most? What game are you most worried about to start the season? I know Eric's also 140. There's a little 140 shout out right there from Eric. So you guys can dupe together there. Dave, your thoughts on those first 6 games, as it's only now a couple weeks away?
No, I mean, obviously, it's not too bad of a start. I mean, against Cincinnati, sort of in the opening sort of stretch isn't terrible. Again, obviously, Minnesota, it's interesting. The first 2 home games are against teams in the Western Conference. And obviously, they played Minnesota last year, in which I think me and Mike discussing that game. I think that's probably one of the tougher pills to swallow in terms of games they did lose last year. Yep. I think that's probably one of the games you'd look at and think they didn't deserve to lose. And I think all 3 goals came from obviously terrible. I think they lost 3-2 last year, wasn't it?
In
Minnesota, all 3 goals were, yeah.
Yeah, it was like 3-2. I think it was like the final second, right? I can't remember exactly the score now.
It was infuriating.
Yeah,
all the goals were just woeful. I think that's putting it nicely. Again, I think the home games are all quite favourable because, I mean, again, they got a good record against the Columbus Crew last year at home, and then you play a debuting team in Charlotte. So, again, maybe this comes back to bite me. I can't really see Charlotte being a big threat in this first year. To probably be like any other sort of expansion team year where they just sort of find their feet, pick up a win when they can. Not going to really make a dent in the season. I think, the 2 road games are sort of the big ones. Montreal, a bit of a sticky team for the Union last year, I feel they went. And then obviously NYCFC, a bit of a rubber match, bit of a grudge match after last year's Eastern Conference Finals. That could be a bit of an interesting one, especially after the one of the games they had two of the games last year, they had red cards and all sort of kicked off a bit. So again, I think that March 19th one's going to be a really big one for all Union fans. I think that'd be the one that sort of checked off that sort of first 6 games where they really want to win, try and get revenge.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Jose? Any kind of thoughts on those first 6 games of the season?
Yeah, I mean, I look at these first 6 and I can frankly envision the Union walking out of there with full points. I
hope so, yeah.
I would hope so, though. That March 19th day playing on that Mickey Mouse field in New York is the ghost that has haunted really the entire MLS, if not certainly the Philadelphia Union. So I'm really intrigued to see how the team figures that one out, because ultimately, I think at some point we're gonna have to win there when it matters most. Hopefully, it's not anytime soon. Hopefully, it's never that they don't have home field advantage. And frankly, it would be criminal for the playoffs to be played in a baseball field. But nonetheless, again. Charlotte, another really interesting team where we could see them finally get their first win after losing their first 4, and we are the ones who give up their first 3 points or maybe a draw, and then we come back to the drawing board and say, well, damn, 2 points that would have probably set us off to a different spot within the table. So Columbus is always really tough. That's a good, consistent team. Luckily, it's here with us right away before we go there later on in the season. But March 19th and April 2nd are the ones that I worry about the most. Sure, Montreal and Minnesota. I don't know enough about the Quakes, and frankly, I'm not too worried about them to pay too much attention. As awful as that sounds, but
no, I get that. Yeah.
An interesting start.
I think you have to worry particularly about the Charlotte game is the letdown spot. You think, okay, let's say, for example, you go to NYCFC and you pull off the win at Yankee Stadium, right? So you're coming back home off this huge high, and you're looking at your schedule and you think, I have to face Columbus in a week. Do you get up for that match against Charlotte as much, having maybe lower expectations with them? So that could be a game that causes those problems simply from the way it's sandwiched in between those two really big conference games. Yeah. But
I think this metaphor will probably stick with both of you. And I said it earlier on Twitter in a way, but like that March 19th game is the perfect comparison to going on a cold, rainy night at Stoke City. It's that game that's ugly. It's that game that's physical. It's that game that's on a field that just doesn't make sense. So yeah, it's very much that shit. Sorry, I don't mean that. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Swear away.
We've said worse.
Okay, I'm thinking to myself, shit, this is the game that's gonna make us drop 3 or drop 2. That March 19th game, and yeah, it's that cold, rainy night in Stoke City.
I mean, I think so. It's good. Yeah, I mean, again, obviously you alluded to earlier. I mean, I think you might can be going into the Charlotte game, and last year the Union did start very slow. I mean, I think it took 4 or 5 games to win their, or maybe not 3 or 4 games to win their first game. It took them ages to win at home. That first league game at home. If they go to that Charlotte game, they've got 2 points from their first 4 games, and they've struggled to pick up any momentum. That Charlotte game is going to be huge because if they go into that game at home, drop points in that game, fail to win that game, and I think not to say then fans perhaps might start to panic a bit. I mean, again, this is meant to be a team where there's title aspirations for this team, and if you're dropping points to a poor San Jose Earthquakes team, you're failing to beat a kickstart team in Charlotte, then I mean, obviously the reactionary fan, people on social media will be like, oh shit, maybe we aren't that good this year. Do you know what I mean? And again, that can dent confidence. I think if that game is going to be huge, it could, it could help. Maybe the Union do start quick this year. The 4 games unbeaten, that could be a statement game for them as well. Put 3 or 4 past them, statement of intent, or it could go the other way, as Jose was saying, lose to Charlotte, and then sort of all hell breaks loose, and we're just staring into the pit of despair. I mean, it could go one or 2 ways, or a shitty 1-0 win, and you just move on to the next one. Who knows? But I think that could be a big game in terms of how the rest of the season's looked at.
Well, I think to Eric's point, I mean, Jose, you know this from probably going to the home openers over the years. The Union don't exactly start off their seasons very well for the most part. I've been to plenty of home opener losses, bad performances. I think Eric posted actually online the 2019 game against Toronto FC, which is just bitterly cold, and they played crappy. And it's just one of those games where you're just like, man, I do not want to be here right now because it's just a bad environment overall. So that is something that is certainly a concern, because if you do lose that home opener, then you got to travel to Montreal. If you only come out there with a draw, there is massive expectations that you come home and beat San Jose, because you want to start off the season at least with 4 points to start in the first 3 weeks. So it could be tough sledding for the Union. And then if you do, for whatever reason, only draw against San Jose, now you got to go to NYCFC and try to pull off a win there. So you really, as Dave alluded to, go into that Charlotte game possibly with a massive pressure building around you to pick up a win, to earn some points. But I think that kind of goes to the last thing we should discuss tonight before we run extra late. What are realistic expectations for this team? What are realistic expectations for players like Mikael Ua or Carranza or anybody else in the lineup? As Dave, I think, posted on Twitter the other day for Jim Curtin's press conference, and Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Curtin compared Carranza to Castellanos, right? Is that who he compared him to? Was it Carranza?
Let me quickly find. It might have been.
Because I know he compared him to somebody, and if once Dave finds that, he can kind of correct me or confirm what I'm saying. But there's a lot of expectation. We want Mikael to be this 45 goal a year scorer, right? So this amazing guy. Jose, I want to push it to you while Dave looks for that tweet. Realistic expectations for this club, and what would you consider be a successful or failing season for the Philadelphia Union?
I mean, to be honest with you, we have not finished below third, if I am remembering correctly, and I'm doing a lot of clicking here, but I don't think we finished below third since 2018.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to expect any less than that.
Agreed.
So
Agreed.
I think there's also a lot of moving pieces to be figured out, right? Does New York City lose Castellanos in some sort of sale? And who else within the Eastern Conference, who else is selling, who is buying, and what does that look like? But ultimately, I think it's fair for us to expect. We were at the doorstep of the MLS final, and what really brought us down was an outbreak of COVID. So I think I'd be hard pressed to expect anything less than second or a Supporter Shields finish, and then ultimately making it to the semifinals again. And if push comes to shove, losing that game by one or in penalties, I think that's the least I can expect. And obviously, I think we all would love to see a championship won. I certainly don't have a lot of hope or expectations for the U.S. Open Cup, and I'm intrigued to see how Tanner feels about that tournament. I think that's going to be very much a tool for him to develop academy players and youth and talent, which is okay. I think that's what high quality teams do, and I think we are turning into one of those, if not already. So I think we'll shift our focus to the league, and again, a semifinal loss and penalties, or us going to the MLS championship match and winning it. That's the least I can expect. We again are so savvy with our purchases and bringing Mikael Ua and Carranza for, again, pennies to the dollar of what he's worth. Certainly his salary is a different story, but really his transfer fee is obviously negligible. So yeah, I think we retained and we picked up what we needed, and we were pretty set last year. It's just unfortunate that it was against it wasn't self-harm that brought us down, but rather something that was just uncontrollable. So that's kind of what I expect for this season, and just so incredibly excited to be there on the 26th and throughout the season.
Yes, absolutely. And Eric puts in his comment here, he wants the cup, the three, which we've seen 3 Open Cup finals now, 2 of which I was at, which were just hard to watch. Do you put the quote unquote B team in that Open Cup and see how far you get, and then switch to your A team if you do have a chance to win the cup that year? But I think you're right. I think all focus has to be on the MLS Cup. It has to be on the big picture, the big prize, which has eluded this team. And obviously the last 2 seasons you had high expectations. You had the Supporter Shield year. You lose to the Revolution after you beat them about 1,000 times during the season. And then last year, of course, COVID comes and kicks our ass. But Dave, were you able to find that tweet on the about?
Yeah, it wasn't Ua, it was Carranza.
That's what I'm saying. Carranza, yes.
Jim compared Carranza to Castellanos, which is a very, very interesting comparison between 2 players. I mean, not to put a lot of pressure on a young guy who has struggled to make an impact into Miami of all teams. So again, not really, but again, obviously, it's interesting to see Jim heaping so much praise upon a player that who's only just walked through the door. So I mean, again, it's raising a lot of people's expectations. So it can only go one way. I'll let you guys assume which way that's going to go, but I mean, fingers crossed.
Well, I
Julian.
think I think that you don't hear Curtin overly praise players unless they've earned some sort of praise. Same thing he says with the younger players from the academy. He typically doesn't give them time until they've earned that time. So if Jim does say something of that nature, the same way he compared Harris Medunian and Jack McGlynn last year, he doesn't really make those comparisons too often. So I'm sure that. I mean, I guess as fans, that gives us really a lot of hope for him. But the expectations for him, for Mikael Ua, has to be similar to what we had with Gazdag last year. You cannot expect him to come into this league or into this team, this lineup, this culture, whatever you want to call it, firing on all cylinders. There has to be some sort of growing pains and chemistry building between them. But I think to Jose's point, and Dave, I think you and I kind of agreed upon this last year and over Twitter Messenger. For me, it's MLS Cup or bust. It's MLS final or bust. I think you've constructed this lineup and this depth and this roster to compete at the highest level possible.
Yeah.
And if you get bumped in the first round of the playoffs, if you don't even make the play, even if you make the Eastern Conference Finals, that is not progress compared to here. That is just finishing where you were the previous season. So, I mean, Dave, do you think that's a fair assessment? Are we kind of in agreement with that?
I think so. Yeah, I think it depends on how they do in the Open Cup as well. Because I think if you end up getting to an Open Cup final, you still got the Eastern Conference Finals. People look at it, oh, they got to a final and things like that. But I mean, again, I think obviously go back to the Open Cup thing. I think just as you said, just chucking out sort of the second team into that competition. I think it really just depends who you face. I think again, if you end up playing like a Columbus Crew in the first round, I don't really know how the Open Cup really works, but you end up playing an MLS team in the first round, or I could really see Jim, mixing it up, not just playing Matt Freeze in goal, but Bidzo, Elliott, and Finley at the back, Matt Real left back, and obviously I meant to say earlier in the show, re-signing Matt Real was one of the more underrated moves this window. Because it allows gives Union so much more depth along that left-hand side, and it allows them to rest Kai Wagner a lot more as well. I think that there's probably Ernest's most underrated move this window. But again, I think it depends how they get on. I mean, they could probably get away with playing a bench team against teams that aren't like USL teams, whatever. One like the lower leagues in America. But I think again, if they end up playing an MLS team, I can see Jim, playing, mixed lineups. Some of the stars you might play Uwar against in the cup. Who knows? You might play Carranza against a decent MLS team. So I think again the Open Cup allows you to experiment as well. I think it allows you to look at perhaps other formations which you might not use in the league, but you think okay, we can give it a go here because there's a freedom. So I think the Open Cup's a free hit. It allows you to experiment. But again, I think, as you alluded to, they need to progress on that Eastern Conference final last year. Otherwise, it's sort of, you've made the big moves, you've made the big splashes, but you're just exactly at the stage you were last year with perhaps a lesser roster and, with more responsibility in the CCL.
I just looked something up real quick online about the cup. So it says here, via Wikipedia, so I don't know how reliable you want to call it. It says 8 teams have also won the double, claiming the MLS Cup and either the Supporter Shield, U.S. Open Cup, or the Canadian Championship during the same season. So the odds of us winning 2 trophies this year are slim, but I think as you guys have kind of mentioned a bit here, if there's the opportunity presents itself, go for it. 100% go for it. See what you can bring home. Jose, as a fan for about pretty much as long as I have, if not been longer, would you say if you won the U.S. Open Cup, are you okay with not winning the MLS Cup this year if you make it to at least the Eastern Conference Finals or the final?
I can't help but feel like the Open Cup is a lesser tournament, as terrible as that sounds. And I think that's an analog or a comparison to it would be for all of us European soccer, especially Prem watchers, is the Carabao Cup, right? It's wonderful that Manchester City won it 4 years in a row, but it is not like winning the league, and it's not like winning the FA Cup or certainly not even remotely close to the Champions League whatsoever. So I don't know that we can hang our heads on a U.S. Open Cup, especially how many times we've had the opportunity to bring that silverware into Subaru Park or then PPL or Talon, whatever the heck it was at the time. But ultimately, I think we should have our targets set on that cup, bringing that cup home and not of the MLS Cup. I think we had a great opportunity last year with the Champions League Cup, but if that back heel by Casper would have gone in early on, I think that game's a little different. But that's neither here or there. Maybe we punch our tickets to compete in that competition again this year. So I don't know. I don't know that I'm too upset if we win it, but I'm certainly not as happy if we would have won the league itself.
I think that's a great point by you as we kind of wrap up the show. If we do qualify it for again next year, think about how daunting next year's schedule will be. But for now, we really do have our focus on one prize overall, and that is the MLS Cup and league play, which is nice. And I think last year, Dave, just from covering the team, how exhausting it was covering so many matches, 3 matches a week. Every single week seemed to have like a Wednesday game. It was just nonstop. The season was very much nonstop. And for these players especially, what was it? The first month, it was like, 7 games in 18 days or something crazy like that?
Unbelievable. 6 games, 6 games in 18 days or 19 days, I think it was.
Yeah, so it's certainly daunting. So it is a refreshing bit of a relief to have a more normal schedule entering this season. But we're going to wrap up the show now. We've kind of going to go over an hour, but I think we've discussed everything that I think a lot of fans want to talk about. Go ahead, Jose. Yeah, I want to see your final thoughts before we close up the show.
Yeah, I think one thing I wanted to acknowledge and bring, I don't want to say bring to light, but myself as a Bolivian, extremely proud to have seen this with the Hall of Fame entries this year with Marco Echeverri, who should be and is probably a legend in the MLS, or should be known as a legend in the MLS, finally being inducted into the Hall of Fame, the National Soccer Hall of Fame this year. I grew up and actually played in the same academy that he played in Bolivia, and that of Tawichi, which was incredibly influential in that country, and certainly influential in me and my brothers as we competed within that academy. But I think he's a legend, a trailblazer for the MLS, and should be recognized. So as a Bolivian, I'm extremely proud to be able to say that he is in the National Soccer Hall of Fame, and just a small point of pride for me, and something that was really touching as I was looking at who was inducted this year.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. I love it. Dave, any final thoughts as well before we close it up?
Again, as we touched upon, I think again this season is somewhat final or bust. I think again you've got your striker, you've got the guy that you think if you are in a tough spot in the playoffs, he's going to be the guy to get you through it. Or they believe he's going to be the guy to get you through it. It's clearly that they've invested upon the team. Obviously, they've got Kwanzaa as well. But yeah, I think again it's going to be a very interesting season. It probably is certainly going to be the one that everyone's coming in with the most expectation for. So again, it depends how it's dealt upon, but yeah, I think again you have to continue to improve upon year upon year. It can't stagnate now, otherwise the last 3-4 years have been for nothing. If they start to regress at the finishing line, so yeah, I think they have to get to the final, or at least emulate last, or at least perform better than last year in terms of the league. Actually winning away games, winning away league games. Yep. I think that is probably the most important thing. I think outside that Cincinnati game, I think the last league win on the road was like in May.
It was like July, it was a long time. We had a pretty bad stretch there, and that's the thing. As successful as last year was, there was this bit of frustration throughout the season with the team.
There were glaring issues.
Yeah. 100% issues that came, and we saw in the final moments with Olivier kind of losing his man, those mental lapses that we saw time after time after time. So it's the maturity, the progression, the overall improvement of the franchise from top to bottom, not just the players, but the coaches, the front office, taking this team from just the 5th team in Philly to a team that deserves and gets a lot of recognition, as we saw at the back end of that season. But Jose, before I close it out, thank you so much for joining us again. We love having
Cheers,
you
listener.
on. We're going to have you on again, I promise you, especially once the season kicks off. But for now, Dave, you and I, we have a couple weeks to kind of think on the season. We might have a show maybe next week or the week before, maybe right before the home opener to kind of preview the game and get on with it. But Philadelphia Union fans, you only have a couple weeks to go before we are back in Super Park chanting and having a great time. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Have a great weekend. Dupe.
Go Union.
Go Dupe Union.